9 incredible pickup trucks revealed as heartwarming fails discover their unexpected downfall. In the heart of Maple Grove, a small town where pickup trucks were more than just metal and wheels, Hank stood poised to unveil his passion project 9 classic trucks, each with a story that dripped with dreams, struggles, and a hint of nostalgia. The fair was coming, and excitement buzzed in the air like bees around sweet clover. But as destiny would have it, sometimes the best-laid plans go sideways. On the day of the big reveal, the crowd gathered, eyes wide, excitement crackling in the cool autumn air. Hank, a 36-year-old mechanic with grease under his fingernails and love in his heart, felt that familiar rush of anticipation. But before he could even catch his breath, one of the trucks, the pride of his labor, spluttered, backfired, and fizzled right there on stage. Hank's chest tightened. Laughter erupted, people chuckling, pointing fingers, and Hank's smile faltered. How could anything so lovingly restored end up like this? A comical failure. The sound of rain drumming down shattered the moment, clouds rolling in as if nature conspired against him. Disappointment washed over Hank like a sudden storm tide. His heart sank as he watched a few folks pack up, the spirit of the day washing away with the rain. Could this be how his story ended, under the weight of embarrassment and defeated dreams? Just when he thought all was lost, the townsfolk began to congregate. They didn't fade away. Instead, they rallied. A group of men and women, all wearing that unmistakable spirit of community, came together around Hank. Old farmers, young entrepreneurs, lifelong friends, all with memories tied to his trucks. Each had their own tale, spun from the trucks that carried them through times of trial and triumph. Suddenly, it wasn't just about Hank and his machines. It was about everyone. "I remember that old blue truck," said Mr. Jenkins, a local farmer, wiping away tears of laughter. "My granddad taught me how to drive in that thing." Laughter echoed around, and Hank finally smiled, realizing his work wasn't just metal and labor. It was woven into the lives of his neighbors. Before we continue, I need to let you know about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, hit that bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can drop a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. As the rain began to ease, people moved closer, their hands dirty and cheerful as they pitched in to help fix the beloved machines. The air buzzed with newfound energy. Hank's failures turned into a communal workshop filled with unity, determination, and laughter. Yet as smiles exchanged and hearts mended together, a chill crept in, a reminder of Richard Hayes, the wealthy businessman who threatened to sweep in with his flashy, empty spectacle at the fair. Would the overwhelming spirit of the Maple Grove community prove stronger than ambition and wealth? With the trucks fixed and stories shared, a lingering question hung in the air like the calm after the storm. Could this be the moment that changed everything for Hank and his town? As he took a deep breath, anticipation tinged with the unknown made his heart race. The true test was yet to come. Hank gazed at the crowd, now buzzing with energy, a breathtaking wave of support washing over him. The laughter and camaraderie wrapped around him like a warm blanket, dispelling the chill that had threatened to steal his spirit. Hands worked together, staining sleeves with oil and dirt, yet no one seemed to mind. They were reclaiming the sense of belonging that had sparked the revival of Hank's old beauties. As the final touches tightened around each truck, the air sang with stories, young couples recalling road trips, fathers laughing about family camping adventures, and women sharing how these trucks once carried them through their struggles. Each tale wove a shared history, creating stronger bonds among the townsfolk. For the first time, Hank truly understood the heart of Maple Grove. It wasn't just about the vehicles. It was about the people they connected, the journeys they represented. "Hey, Hank," said Bonnie, one of the town's youngest entrepreneurs, her face glowing with excitement. "What if we showcase these stories at the fair? We can highlight each truck and what it means to our community." "Yeah," chimed in another voice. "We could create a little booth, share pictures and memories while selling treats. People could submit stories too." Hank felt a swell in his chest at the enthusiasm. For so long, he had held on to these trucks alone, But now they were transforming into symbols of shared experiences, a living reminder of the values that echoed through every corner of the town. As the clouds disappeared, sunlight burst through, lighting up the faces of the gathering crowd. Each beam seemed to shine down on Hank's heart, signaling a blossoming hope. But just as things began to feel like they were turning around, a familiar sound floored him. An engine roared in the distance, a sound so insipidly loud it cut through the joyous atmosphere like a knife. "Here comes Hayes," a neighbor muttered, squinting toward the road. Hank's stomach twisted. Richard Hayes had arrived in his brand-new, gleaming truck. The perfect embodiment of everything Hank had been fighting against: the arrogance of money, the emptiness of showmanship. Richard waved from his truck, a smug grin plastered across his face. The crowd's chatter quieted as all eyes focused on the wealthy businessman parading into their hometown with a flourish. "I knew it wouldn't take long for the circus to roll into town," Hank whispered, his fingers clenching tight around the edge of a truck's hood. Hayes parked and stepped out, his sharply tailored suit contrasting vividly with the work-worn clothes of Hank's friends. "What's all the fuss about?" he called out, a smirk playing on his lips. "Seems like the local favorites have become quite the spectacle today." Hank felt anger flare up within him. Who did Hayes think he was? But that wasn't just the question hanging in the air: would they show their community strength against the force of wealth and shiny facades? "Let us show him who we really are," Hank called out, rallying the townsfolk back into a circle, recalling every shared story, every bit of pride they felt as a community. A tide of resolution surged through him. With renewed spirit, Hank knew they had to take a stand, not just for his trucks, but for their way of life. He took a step forward, locking eyes with Hayes, determination like chained steel coursing through him. But just as he began to speak, a distant cry shattered the moment, an unexpected twist in their newfound hope. "Help! Someone's in trouble." All heads snapped towards the sound, a deep worry clutching each heart. This wasn't just about trucks anymore, it was about standing together when the stakes were higher than ever. What danger loomed ahead? Panic raced through the crowd as they searched for the source of the plea. Was it a child? An animal? The air thickened with uncertainty, tension snaking its way into the hearts of everyone gathered. Hank's instincts kicked in, and without another second to think, he dashed toward the sound. "Stay together," he shouted, looking back at the crowd. He could see the fear mirrored in their eyes. Each person wore a brave face, but he knew that inside, they were all wondering the same thing: what had happened? The cries grew louder, echoing off the nearby buildings. Hank weaved through a tangled mess of people until he reached the edge of the fairgrounds, where a small group had gathered, their faces a mix of concern and confusion. He pushed past them, driven by a force he couldn't quite name. What he discovered was shocking. A young boy, no more than 8 years old, dangled precariously from the ledge of a rickety old structure that used to house carnival games. His terrified eyes were wide, and his grip on the wooden beam was slipping. "Don't move. I'm coming," Hank yelled, his voice cracking with urgency. The boy looked down, panic bursting into silent tears. Behind Hank, the crowd held its collective breath. This was a nightmare waiting to happen. With no time to lose, Hank climbed onto the old wooden frame. It creaked under his weight, but he didn't care. He just focused on the tearing sound of the boy's sobs and the way his slender fingers trembled. With every pulse of adrenaline, Hank felt alive, more than he had in years. As worry strangled his throat, it was replaced with a fierce determination. He could do this. He had to. "Just reach for me," he urged, extending his hand. The boy's gaze flickered to Hank as if he were a lifeline in a turbulent sea. Slowly, the trembling hand began to move, reaching out, grasping for hope. The crowd gasped in unison, the moment hanging between dread and desperation. "Come on, kid. You're so close," Hank encouraged, his voice steady. The boy's tiny fingers grasped Hank's hand, and with a sudden surge of strength, Hank pulled him upwards. It was a struggle. The fear written on the boy's face mirrored the kind of fear Hank himself had faced in his life: fear of losing everything, of failing. Just when it felt like the weight of the world rested on his shoulders, he felt the boy's weight shift, and Hank steadied himself. A wave of relief flooded through him as he pulled the child up and into his arms. Cheers erupted from the crowd, a tidal wave of support washing over the scene. Hank felt the heat of their applause, a stark contrast to the cold anxiety that had gripped him just moments before. He looked into the boy's eyes, a kaleidoscope of gratitude and disbelief. But the celebration was cut short when Hank noticed something peculiar over the crowd's heads. Richard Hayes stood apart, his expression twisted in disdain, hands crossed over his chest, cold and unyielding. "Always the hero, aren't you?" Hayes called out, scoffing. "But does this really make you any better? One act doesn't erase a lifetime of mistakes." Hank's heart raced again, not just from the confrontation, but from the realization that while they celebrated the boy's rescue, Hayes was a persistent shadow lingering over Maple Grove's revival, threatening to expose old wounds. Is this really the end of their community's struggle, or just another beginning? Hank felt the weight of his unresolved conflict bearing down on him. The fair might have brought them together, but the fight was far from over. What dangerous game was Hayes planning to play next? Hank's pulse still hammered in his ears as he pulled the boy close, shielding him from the world surrounding them. The cheers faded into a dull roar, the warmth of their gratitude barely reaching him through the chill of Hayes' words. He glanced at the child, still trembling, and felt a surge of protectiveness wash over him. "Are you okay?" Hank asked, holding the boy firmly in his arms as he scanned the crowd for familiar faces. The child nodded slowly, wiping tears from his cheeks, and Hank couldn't help but smile, despite the shadows lurking nearby. While the crowd celebrated, Hayes loomed larger in Hank's mind. He had been a thorn in Hank's side for far too long, but now it felt different. Hutch, the town's old sheriff, nudged Hank with an elbow, coming into view. "You did good, Hank," he said, pride glowing in his voice. But Hank's gaze drifted back to Hayes, whose sly smile sent a wave of unease through him. "Thanks, Hutch, but I can't shake this feeling," Hank confessed, his thoughts racing. Hayes won't let this go. "He never does." "Let him bark," Hutch replied, shrugging. "He's got his issues. You just saved a kid, Hank. Focus on that." But it wasn't so simple. The crowd was dispersing, excitement diminishing as parents gathered their children, vendors packed up their stalls, and the fair lost its festive glow. Hank could sense something stirring in the air, a tension pulled taut like a frayed string ready to snap. Hayes' chilling laughter cut through the fading celebration. "What's next, Hank? A medal?" he taunted, stepping closer. "You think that's going to wash away the past? Those mistakes still hang over your head like a storm cloud." Hank's throat tightened. He had endured Hayes' barbs before, but there was something different about this confrontation. The crowd turned, some still acknowledging the ordeal of the rescue, others caught in the guilt Hayes was spinning. "Enough," Hank shouted, his voice elevated with a mix of anger and desperation. "You want to talk about the past? Fine, let us talk. But not here, not in front of these people." "Why not?" Hayes replied, eyes gleaming. "They deserve to know who their so-called hero really is." As Hayes pressed, Hank felt the weight of everyone's gaze settle on him. Their approval felt like a fragile glass, sickeningly precarious. The rescue had been a moment of clarity, a chance to do something right, and now Hayes was using it as a weapon. The crowd shifted, whispers rolling like thunder. "You don't know," Hank began, but Hutch stepped in front of him. "Enough," Hutch barked, standing tall between Hank and Hayes. "Leave him alone, Hayes. You've made your point." A chilling pause fell over the fairgrounds, silence descending like a dark curtain. Then, in a split second, the moment shattered. A scream pierced through the void, shrill and frantic, a different voice, echoing from somewhere deeper in the fairgrounds beyond. Hank's instincts kicked in once more, and the air thickened again, a surge of adrenaline priming his body to act. He turned toward the sound just as the crowd shifted, their attention drawn like moths to a flame, fear rekindled. "What now?" Hayes muttered, but Hank was already moving, striding away from the uncomfortable confrontation. There would be no escaping it now. A child's voice, anxious and distressed, floated over the chaos. "Help! Somebody! Please!" As Hank dashed away, he couldn't help but think, was this just another rescue, or would it lead him deeper into the heart of Maple Grove's haunting secrets? Hank sprinted into the heart of the fairgrounds, his heart pounding in rhythm with the distant cries. The cheerful sounds of laughter and chatter seemed to fade into a distant echo, replaced by a singular clarity. He had to find the source of that desperate scream. The path twisted through the tangle of colorful tints, booths teetering on the edge of collapse as they were hastily disassembled. The scent of popcorn and cotton candy lingered in the air, now cloying and somehow inappropriate amidst the rising terror. He pushed past a group of startled onlookers, their eyes wide with worry and confusion. Over there, a woman pointed, her face pale, as she clutched a small child to her side. Hank followed her gaze and bolted toward a flickering row of lights where the Ferris wheel loomed above them, its shadow stretching like a giant hand across the ground. "Help! Somebody! Please!" The voice rang out again, filled with urgency. Hank broke into a full sprint, thoughts racing. As he reached the base of the Ferris wheel, he saw a small figure, the source of the cries, struggling beneath one of the carts, twisted at an awkward angle. It was a little girl, her blonde hair catching the light as she cried for help, fear etched across her face. "Hank!" Hutch's voice called out behind him. "Wait up! Get the crowd back!" Hank barked, rushing toward the girl. He crouched down, trying to keep his voice calm. "Hey, it's okay, I'm here. What is your name?" "Sarah," she screamed, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Help me. I can't get out." "Okay, hold on, Sarah. I'm going to help you," he promised, his heart pounding aggressively. He glanced around for anything he could use. Hutch appeared, his brow knit with concern. "What happened?" Hutch asked, kneeling beside Hank. "I don't know. She's stuck," Hank replied, assessing the situation. The cart loomed heavy above them, the rusty gears clicking ominously. "Don't worry, honey. We've got you," Hutch assured her, his voice soothing. "Can you wiggle at all?" "I'm trying. It hurts." Sarah's breaths were quick and sharp. "Just a little further," Hank said. His fingers scrambled to find a grip on the edge of the cart. The crowd began to gather again, their murmurs escalating into a low hum of panic. "I need you to help me lift this, Hutch," Hank commanded, positioning himself at an angle. Together, they heaved, straining against the weight of the metallic structure. It creaked and groaned, but slowly, it shifted. "Sarah, can you pull your leg out now?" Hank urged her. I think so," she gasped, her determination shining through her fear. Hank squeezed through the tight space, his own body protesting as he reached for her ankle. With every second, the crowd seemed to draw closer, their anxiety palpable, but he focused solely on the child's tear-soaked face. "Come on, just a bit more," he encouraged, panic creeping into his own heart. Finally, with a sudden jolt, Sarah's foot slipped free. She scrambled backward, crying out in fright as Hank pulled her to safety, wrapping her in his arms. The crowd released a unified breath of relief, a wave of applause rushing over them. As Hank held her close, he could feel the warmth of her tiny body against his, and the shaky breaths begin to calm. He looked past her to the curious faces, the desperation now melted into gratitude. But as he glanced at Hayes standing at the back of the crowd, that chilling grin returned, a reminder that the battle wasn't over. "Nice job, hero," Hayes shouted, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "But you can't keep running from your past forever." A cold wave swept through Hank, the reality of his fear hitting hard. Did he really think he could outrun the shadows that followed him? He breathed deep, holding Sarah protectively, but the claws of doubt sank deeper. As the crowd cheered, Hank felt an unsettling tension settle in his stomach. In that moment, he realized the rescue could cost him more than just his sanity. Was he still strong enough to face the truth in a town where his past loomed larger than the Ferris wheel? With one question heavy on his heart, he wondered if there would be more dangers ahead, not just for him, but for everyone around him. What would it take to finally silence Hayes and the ghosts of his old mistakes? Hank lifted Sarah closer, feeling her tiny frame trembling against him. The cheers from the crowd felt distant now, muted by the weight of Hayes' words echoing in his mind. He could still see that taunting grin, like a crack in the foundation of his soul. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" he whispered, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes. They sparkled with fear, but also relief. "I think so," Sarah replied, her voice small. It tore at Hank's heart, and he brushed her hair back, trying to help her calm down. The crowd around him was beginning to disperse, people gradually moving about either to go home or to help the fair staff with the cleanup. But Hank remained rooted, his fear morphing into a heavy dread. He wished he could simply embrace this moment of victory, but silence loomed ominously in the air. Let us get her to her parents, Hutch suggested, his hands still dusty from the effort of pulling Sarah free. Right? Hank nodded, glancing around. Where are they? I'm here. A woman burst through the crowd, her face wild with panic. Upon reaching them, she scooped Sarah into her arms, holding her close and murmuring reassurances. Hank stepped back, his heart aching as they embraced. Thank you so much. The woman cried, her eyes glistening with tears. You saved my girl. Just as Hank opened his mouth to respond, a memory flashed through his mind, his own mother fussing over him after he pulled off a minor childhood dare. The warmth of that moment felt far away now, eclipsed by the weight of his choices and decisions that haunted him. With a shaky breath, he turned his back on them, his heart heavy and his thoughts racing. I need to talk to Hayes, he muttered under his breath. Hutch caught his arm, holding him back. What are you thinking? I can't keep running from him. Not anymore. Hank felt a surge of determination rise, aching against the tide of fear. No, Hank, think about what you're doing. He.S. not just some bad luck. He.S. dangerous. Hutch's voice was low, urgent. I know, but if I don't confront him, what is going to stop him? Hank's resolve solidified, the memory of Sarah's terror spurring him onward. Hutch stepped in front of him, concern etching deep lines into his forehead. You're not alone in this, okay? Let us go together. Hank sighed, nodding despite the inner turmoil swirling inside him. Together, they made their way through the crowd, weaving past familiar faces that regarded him with a mixture of admiration and pity. Not far off, Hayes leaned against a sagging tent, arms crossed, a faint smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. The space between them felt electric, full of unsaid words and unresolved tensions. Look who decided to show up, Hayes called out, eyes glaring with that familiar malice. Thought you'd whisk her away and pretend this never happened? Hank clenched his fists, every muscle in his body taut with an instinct he couldn't ignore. But before he could respond, a youth emerged from the crowd, appearing highly agitated, eyes darting between Hayes and Hank. There you are? He shouted, his voice cracking. We need to get out of here now. It's happening again. Confusion flashed across Hank's features. What do you mean? The boy took a deep breath, shaking with panic. The Ferris wheel, it's not just broken. It's going to fall. The air shifted, uncertainty falling heavy like lead. Hank's heart raced, new dread replacing the anger swelling inside him. He turned to Hutch, the magnitude of the danger dawning on them both. What do we do now? Hutch asked, eyes wide with concern. Hank glanced back at Hayes, who watched with a sly glimmer, almost relishing in the chaos unfolding. He knew they were just starting to scratch the surface of the dangers waiting for them. As the sound of frantic screams began to rise from the fairgrounds, Hank's instincts kicked in. He straightened, determined to face whatever lay ahead, knowing that in this chaotic moment, everything intertwined: the past, the present, and what needed to be done next. Let us move, he said resolutely, as they raced toward the Ferris wheel. And in the back of his mind, how many more ghosts would rise to meet him? They sprinted across the fairgrounds, the cheer of the earlier festivities now replaced by a cacophony of confusion and fear. Bright lights from the games flickered ominously, casting shadows that seemed to come alive, whispering secrets of disaster ahead. Hank's heart thudded violently, each beat echoing in his ears as they approached the Ferris wheel. The towering structure loomed before them, a giant sentinel that was once a source of joy but now appeared menacing. One look told Hank everything he needed to know. It swayed dangerously, a metallic creak cutting through the chaos. The carnival workers were shouting now, scrambling to get people to safety, but it felt like a race against time. Every second counted. Stay close, he yelled to Hutch, who nodded, eyes wide with alarm. They pressed forward, weaving through the throngs of panicked families. Hank's mind raced, replaying Hayes' taunting words. He could almost hear them reverberating in his head, taunting him. A part of him wanted to confront Hayes, to unleash the pent-up anger, but survival was more important now. As they got closer, a loud crack split through the air. Hank stopped dead in his tracks, heart leaping into his throat. The Ferris wheel shuddered violently. He could see people still trapped in their seats, eyes wide with terror. He felt the collective gasp of the crowd around him, an electric surge of dread that seemed to freeze time. Do something, Hutch shouted, pointing desperately at the Ferris wheel. All Hank could think was that they had to get those people out. It was no longer just about confronting fears. It was about saving lives. Help me. Hank turned to a group of nearby workers, faces pale and frantic. We need to get those people off the Ferris wheel now. The workers seemed paralyzed with shock. We can't. The supports one began, but Hank cut him off. Then we need to act fast. You. He pointed to a young man holding a walkie-talkie, voice commanding. Get everyone else away from the base. We can't risk anyone else getting hurt. With a nod, the young man sprang into action. Hank felt adrenaline flooding his body. There wasn't time for fear, only action. He glanced back at Hutch, who was now moving toward the other side, shouting for people to clear the area. Keep them safe. Hank yelled back, steeling himself. He took a deep breath and sprinted toward the Ferris wheel. He could see faces peering down from the seats high above. They were scared, some were crying. He locked eyes with a little girl, her tiny hands gripping the safety bar. Hang on. We're getting you down, he shouted, trying to reassure her. As he reached the base of the wheel, the ground vibrated beneath him. Another loud crack rang out, and Hank looked up. The topmost carriage began to tilt, angles shifting perilously. Panic surged within him. In that moment, Hayes stepped out of the shadows, a wicked grin plastered on his face. Well, look at this. Heroics on display. You really think you can save them, don't you? Hank's blood boiled. This isn't a game, Hayes. People are going to get hurt, and it's your fault. Maybe not. But I want to see how far you'll go to play the hero. Hayes taunted, eyes glinting with malice. Hank's jaw tightened. There was no time to engage in mind games. Far above, the little girl's cry pierced the noise. He turned back, determination replacing doubt within him, resolved to break through the madness. Hutch, he shouted, eyes darting. We need to get some ladders and ropes. Prepare for a rescue. Hutch nodded from a distance, sprinting toward the Fair's main building. Hank's heart raced. This was it. Would he really pull this off? Could he be the hero everyone expected him to be? The stakes were higher than ever. As the creaks grew louder above him and eyes filled with fear began to widen, Hank inhaled deeply, knowing he was about to face not just the wheel's collapse, but the ghosts of his past that stood between him and his mission, ghosts he was determined to defeat. And in that instant, he realized the battle was far from over. Just when he thought he had it all figured out, a new wave of dread surged through him. What if they couldn't save everyone? What if he failed, amidst the chaos? Hank was about to discover what true bravery meant, and the answer could change everything. The noise was overwhelming. Hank felt the weight of it pressing down, threatening to crush his resolve. As Hutch disappeared into the crowd, Hank's eyes darted back to the Ferris wheel, which creaked ominously, swaying like a living thing ready to collapse. The little girl's terrified face loomed large in his mind, her wide eyes pleading for help. He couldn't turn away. Come on, he whispered under his breath, forcing himself to breathe steadily despite the rising panic in his chest. He wasn't just fighting for her. He was fighting for everyone still trapped up there. People around him fumbled for their phones, unsure whether to record or call for help. The spectacle was one of chaos, disbelief painted across the faces watching the scene unfold. The crowd's tension made Hank feel like a lone island amid raging waters, with expectations and fears swirling around him. Suddenly, a flash of red caught his eye. Hutch sprinted back into view, dragging a heavy ladder behind him, their previous discussions and desperate plans merging into one singular objective. I got it. Let us go, Hutch shouted, muscles straining with effort as he set the ladder against the Ferris wheel's base. Set it higher, Hank urged, urgency pouring from his voice. We need to reach the girl first. As they positioned the ladder, Hank moved closer, his heart thumping so loud he could barely hear Hutch's rallying calls to others to help steady the ladder. A voice in his mind screamed at him. What if it all came crashing down? What if he failed them all? But he silenced it. Fear was a luxury he could not afford. With the ladder finally in place, Hank grabbed the rungs and began to climb, focusing on each step as if it were a bridge to hope. The air felt cooler as he ascended, but sweat trickled down his back. Close now. He could see the little girl's trembling hands, her face streaked with tears. Hey, I'm almost there, he shouted, keeping his tone steady. He wasn't just reassuring her. He was reminding himself of his purpose. But just then, Another loud crack echoed through the night, making Hank freeze. He glanced down, and horror gripped him as he saw the supports shuddering. The world slipped into slow motion, a cascade of screams erupted from the crowd below. "Get down! Everyone, move away!" Someone shrieked. "Hold on!" Hank shouted to the girl, his voice breaking but resolute. He quickly resumed his climb, knowing he couldn't let her down now. Each step felt like a gamble, the ground below vibrating ominously with every creak. Finally, he reached the seat. The little girl looked up with wide eyes, her face a portrait of fear and hope. "You're real, you came," she whimpered. "Of course, I did," he replied, forcing a smile even as his heart raced. "We're going to get you down, I promise." He reached out, extending his hand, but just as he did, the whole structure let out a deafening groan, swaying violently. Hank's heart sank, adrenaline flooding his veins as he realized he wasn't just rescuing her. He was fighting to keep them both alive. "Hank!" Hutch shouted from below, dread and determination etched on his face. "You need to hurry." The little girl's fingers trembled as she reached out for him. "Please," she begged. Hank felt a surge of determination. He couldn't falter now. He grasped her hand and felt her tiny grip tighten around his own. "You're going to be okay," he whispered softly, his voice barely louder than the creaking metal surrounding them. But just as he pulled her toward him, a piercing crack split the air again, and the Ferris wheel began to tilt. Hank's heart raced as everything came crashing down. They weren't out of danger yet, and in that fleeting moment, he realized he had to make a choice that could change everything. Would he risk his own life to save hers? And in that moment, the ground beneath him felt less stable than ever, and the real fight was just beginning. Hank felt the world tilt beneath him, adrenaline coursing through his veins as he held tightly to the little girl's hand. The Ferris wheel creaked, groaned, and leaned further, as though every bolt were screaming in protest. He had to make a choice: stay where he was, risking both their lives, or find a way to get her to safety. "Listen to me," he shouted above the roar, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I need you to be brave. Can you do that for me?" Her nod was small but fierce, a flicker of hope igniting in those frightened eyes. Hank took a deep breath, gauging their precarious position. He could sense the crowd below, the murmur mixing with the tension of the swaying structure, their faith resting on him. "On the count of 3, we're going to move," he said, feeling her tiny fingers grip his hand with determination. 1, 2, the ground shook like a wild beast. 3. He pulled the girl closer, their bodies leaning into the safety of the seat, and she followed suit, inching toward the edge where the ladder would reach them. He could see Hutch below, arms outstretched, his face a mask of focus and fear. "Grab her," he yelled, panic emerging in his voice as the Ferris wheel's groaning intensified. Hank's heart raced as he shifted his weight, letting go of the swing, just for a moment, to help her move. The girl's gaze darted to the sprawling crowd, then back to him. It was a look of trust, a pure, innocent faith that sent a wave of heat through Hank's chest. One nervous glance downward told Hank everything he needed to know. They were out of time. He wrapped an arm around her waist and shouted, "You can do this. You're stronger than you think." With her feet dangling just above the ladder, Hank felt the structure sway one last time, and in a moment that felt stretched across eternity, he hoisted her onto the rungs. "Now, quick!" Using every ounce of strength he had left, he yelled, "Hutch, catch her!" The girl teetered, eyes wide with wonder and fear, and as she slipped down the ladder, Hutch lunged forward, his hands reaching out, ready to embrace her. The release was terrifying. The metal groaned one last time as Hank's heart skipped a beat, but Hutch's hands locked around the girl. Relief washed over him like a sudden downpour. But as he turned to climb down, he felt the structure beneath him convulsing again, a low warning that sent his heart into a freefall. "No, no, no," he gasped, as the ground vibrated violently below him, sending shockwaves through the tower. Every instinct screamed at him to jump, escape while he could. "Hank, move!" Hutch shouted. The urgency in his voice snapped Hank back to reality. With all his might, Hank surged downward, but the Ferris wheel began to shift again, the weight of it tilting at an alarming angle. He heard the terrifying sound of metal snapping, and time slipped away. His feet stumbled, slipping on the edge of the swaying ladder. "Jump!" Hutch yelled, his voice barely audible over the chaos. But Hank couldn't. Not yet. He had to make sure his grip was solid, had to see the little girl safe on the ground below. Just 2 more rungs, and then he could leap. With every ounce of willpower, he fought against the increasing tilt and kept one eye on the girl, who was now safely away. She turned back, her wide eyes locked onto his, and he realized how deeply this moment mattered. Hank let out a desperate breath as he finally launched himself from the last rung. "Hutch!" he screamed, diving towards safety. But in that moment of hope, a shadow blotted out the sky above him. And then, everything erupted into chaos as the Ferris wheel began its final collapse. And it wasn't just the structure Hank understood that lives hung in the balance. What happened next would test every ounce of courage he had ever built within him. And as he braced for impact, one question raced through his mind: was there still time to save everyone? Hank's heart thundered in his chest as he sailed through the air, arms flailing like a windmill caught in a storm. Time seemed to stretch. His focus zeroed in on the terrified faces of the crowd, all of them now part of the greatest fight he had ever faced. He landed hard, rolling to lessen the impact. Pain shot through his shoulder, but the moment his eyes opened, his gaze found Hutch, who rushed over, concern etched deeply in every wrinkle of his face. "Are you crazy?" Hutch yelled, helping him to sit up. Breathless but determined, Hank focused on the Ferris wheel, its mechanical groans echoing like a funeral dirge. Glaring at Hayes, who stood plastered to the ground in disbelief, Hank felt a wave of old fury collide with the adrenaline flowing through his veins. "Get out of here!" Hank shouted at the group of fairgoers still gaping at the impending disaster. They were frozen, but he couldn't afford fear to grip him again. Not now. The Ferris wheel swayed precariously. It seemed to know it was vulnerable. "We need to evacuate this place," Hank called out, voice steady despite the chaos. "Now, everyone, away from the base head for safety." Hutch nodded, horror and admiration mingling in his eyes. "Can you still move?" "I'm fine," Hank replied, forcing a grin. "We have to make sure everyone's okay." With that, he turned back to the scene, bolstered by the memory of Sarah's wide-eyed trust. Around him, a flurry of action erupted. Hutch began directing the crowd as Hank struggled to his feet, placing himself as a shield between Hayes and the panicking people. Hayes stood there, unmoving, his smirk fading to fear as chaos surrounded them. "Look at what you did," Hank shot back, mustering the anger that had long been suppressed. "You brought all this. People are in danger because of you." But Hayes only chuckled darkly. "And yet you still believe in fairy tales, Hank. You're the hero of this story, but we both know it's about to end badly." "Not today," Hank vowed, his voice rising above the noise. He pushed past Hayes and took off running towards the rides in the back, where he had seen families scatter. Faces turned, fear and gratitude mingling in their expressions as they began to follow his lead towards safety. In those frantic moments, Hank's spirit surged. Working together, they helped others escape, a chorus of hope rising amid uncertainty. The cries of children, parents holding hands, and encouragement heard over the cacophony ignited a fire within him. But it wasn't enough. He could feel that tension beneath the ground, feel the rumbling that warned of imminent collapse. "Get to higher ground," he yelled back to Hutch, who was still hurting people. Hank glanced back at the Ferris wheel, the once joyful ride now a tower of terror. "Hutch," he shouted, "we need to stabilize it somehow. The supports can't take this strain much longer." "I'll get some ropes," Hutch yelled back, brows furrowing in determination. Hank turned, making one last scan of the area. He noticed the central support beam, twisted and weakening, the hope of drawing the crowd's attention to safety rapidly fading. It was now or never. Hank sprinted back toward the Ferris wheel, adrenaline fueling his every step. He grabbed what he could from damaged booths nearby, heavy-duty cables, and old harnesses discarded like misplaced dreams. They could serve a purpose. He hastily tied them together, ready to secure the structure long enough for everyone to escape, once and for all. "Hank, what are you doing?" Hutch shouted from a safe distance, eyes widening. "Get out of there." "No, I want to leave. Not when I can still do something," Hank shouted back, shaking off Hutch's voice urging him to flee. He had faced his past, and transformed to turn and run away now? He wouldn't allow it. Determined, Hank climbed onto the remaining stable parts of the Ferris wheel, adrenaline coursing through him. The world tilted without warning, a hidden fear that the structure could give way at any moment. He tied down the cables with all his strength, feeling the security of the harnesses dig into his palms. With every knot, he tightened. Hope burgeoned. "I need you to hold for me," he murmured to the wheel. A collapse would never define him or this town. The crowd gasped collectively when the sound of crunching metal echoed in response to Hank's effort. Raising himself to his feet, he drew deep breaths for focus, then jumped back down. Safety still hovered in the air, eluding him, and everyone still trapped above. "Get out while you can," Hank bellowed back to Hutch, who now spread his strong arms wide, guiding frightened children toward the exits. "Get them to safety." And just like that, threads of hope began to weave through the chaos. Voices rang louder than fear. Laughter broke through the despair. Hank's heart lightened as he felt a community rise together, hand in hand, working to escape the shadow of the Ferris wheel. That as the last few passengers climbed down and made it away, Hutch's voice broke through the raucous noise. "Everyone's out, Hank. Come on." With time running out and the structure leaning dangerously, Hank watched as people ran. Hayes lingered at the edge, his facade faltering, but that unfamiliar light in Hank's chest remained. "Too late, Hayes. The show is over," Hank yelled defiantly, standing tall, ready to face that driving force behind his fears. With one last breath, Hank leaped from the now destabilized structure safety, pulling him like a magnet. He landed on the ground, rolling back into the crowd as the Ferris wheel finally succumbed to gravity. Screams mixed with cheers, echoes of triumph blossoming amid calamity. Hank's heart pounded, adrenaline coursing through his veins. People moved toward him, with expressions of relief and gratitude on their faces. They came together, a once quiet horizon transformed. The end of that day in Maple Grove illuminated something profound. Hank realized this struggle wasn't just his, it was theirs. The burdens that once weighed him down melted in the heat of unity. They had conquered the shadows. No longer merely hiding behind a patchwork of memories, they emerged steadfast, loyal, stronger than ever. His past may have influenced him, but it didn't own him. Defiance and bravery did, and he was part of redefining everything that meant home. With a smile so radiant it felt contagious, Hank looked around as the community came together, tears glistening in eyes of friends, neighbors, families celebrating life. "Let us rebuild," he whispered softly, hope glimmering in his voice. The moment hung between the echoes of calamity and the stirrings of a new beginning. Change was possible. Resilience could blossom amid aching uncertainty. And as the sun dipped low behind the horizon, Hank turned to find Hutch beside him, awe spilling from the corners of his eyes. "You did it, man. You saved them all." "No," Hank said, a light laugh escaping. "We did it together." And as the warmth of community enveloped them, hope lingered, a reminder that they were no longer facing fears alone. They would illuminate the path forward together, one story at a time. Now is the time for you to join this journey. You need to subscribe now to the channel so you won't miss the next exclusive stories that will inspire and uplift. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and show your support for stories that matter. Comment below with your reactions and feelings about this incredible ending. That's what connects us. And don't wait not even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this transformation. Let us keep building this community of courage together.